I'd like to start by showing you one of my favorite pieces of software. It's called The Incredible Machine. It simulates the physical world, and so if I hit the little run flag here, you can see that balls drop and bounce and things break and so forth. And what we have to do is solve a problem. We're presented with a series of problems to solve. In this particular case, it's up on the right-hand side of the screen. Pop the silver balloon. This helium-filled balloon is restrained by the rope, and if we could somehow cut the rope, it would float up, hopefully, and pop itself on this pin. There is a pair of shears here, which is a good hint, but unfortunately that pair of shears is blocked by a block of wood, and we're somehow going to have to solve this problem. I do notice that there is some TNT on top of the block of wood, and I know from a previous puzzle that that is radio linked to this plunger here. So if we could somehow hit the plunger, we'd be on our way at least. Now what we have on the left-hand side is a kit of parts which we can choose to use or not to use, and if we drag them across, we can put them into the workspace. We can inspect them and see what they do. This is just another piece of wood, and we can program them and do various things with them. So what am I going to get to drop on that plunger? Well, this ball would seem to be a good candidate, but it goes the wrong way. Now, I mentioned that this simulation models the laws of physics. It's not necessarily our physics, because if we look at this useful component here, it's an anti-gravity pad. And a bit like a skyhook, I guess. And if we put that underneath the ball and run the simulation, the ball now moves upwards and bounces. That's a good start. So let's put a block of wood up here. We're going to need to extend that and rotate it. Just put it in the right position there. Now we might be able to get the ball onto that plunger. Here we go. Bang goes the TNT. Will the ball drop on the shears? No. So we need to do a couple of more things here. I'm going to use this leaky bucket. See, there's a hole in the bottom of this bucket. You can program how fast the water leaks out. So I'll put that to the, oh, it's already on the maximum. There we go. And with a short piece of rope, tie it onto the bucket, over the pulley onto this bucket here. And fingers crossed, bang goes the TNT, ball drops in the bucket, and after a little while, hopefully enough water will leak out of this bucket here, and we'll see, dum-da-dum-da-dum, snip, bang, problem solved. Now, I was introduced to this piece of software in 1993, and ever since then, I've been very intrigued by it, by a couple of things in particular. The first thing is that this is a profoundly satisfying piece of software to use. And I asked myself the question, why is that? Why is there such a profoundly satisfying feel to this? It's not the graphics. It's partly to do with the fact that it is a problem-solving environment. There are more subtleties to it than that. It has something to do with it having a construction feel to it. As Bill mentioned in the introduction, I am a world expert on Lego. I have a great deal of it. I've only recently passed it on to my son. In 1984, I wrote a book about how to design and experiment with using Lego to learn about robotics. It wasn't a bestseller, but it did make my Lego purchases tax deductible. There is something profoundly satisfying about construction, which we all understand as a child and which we tend to lose as we go into adulthood and into work. And there's something even more than that. It's something very physical about this piece of software, about dragging and dropping and simulating and watching things move and so forth. And that question intrigued me as a researcher for many years. And then there was a second question that intrigued me, and it's this. This piece of software is very obviously object-oriented. From a user perspective, it is clear that you're dealing with objects. Those things that you drag and drop across are objects. They have behaviors. They simulate the physical behaviors. They have properties. They are instantiable from classes that you saw in the parts window on the left-hand side. And they're very obviously objects. Now, like many of you, I have been interested in object-oriented software design and development for many years. And I had a feeling, and I find that this feeling is very common amongst software engineers, that do you remember when you first encountered OO and how you saw the promise of what it was supposed to do? And there is a feeling that that promise simply hasn't been delivered. Anybody identify with that statement? Okay, I see quite a lot of hands going up there. That somehow it hasn't delivered. And I wondered whether this was in any way connected. Why is it that most systems developed using so-called OO approaches are not obviously object-oriented from the perspective of the user? And is that connected? Is that something to do with why OO hasn't delivered its promise? Well, those two questions really defined much of my personal research agenda since 1993. And very fortunately, in the last 2 years, CSC gave me the opportunity to spend a lot of time thinking about this and trying to do something with it. And I had for several years told clients, well, what you should be doing is purchasing or downloading the incredible machine and giving it to your software engineers and asking them, how can you make your software, your business systems, feel more like the incredible machine? Perhaps not to my surprise, nobody really took any notice of this until 18 months ago when I was at I was in Ireland at the DSCFA. That stands for the Department of Social, Community and Family Affairs. It's pretty much exactly equivalent to the Social Security Administration here in the United States. It's the government welfare organization, huge organization, pays out 4.5 billion EQs of benefits in the course of a year. And I had a session with the senior management of this government agency, including the Director General himself, and I had all of them playing with the incredible machine, literally. And at the end of it, I made this usual call, and they said, okay, do it. And I said, well, you must understand, I'm a researcher. My job is to put out in practical ideas to advance the state of the art. And they said, no, do it. Well, I'd like to show you what came out of that conversation. What I'm showing you here is a simulation written in Java of a system that the DSCFA is now developing and which is due to go live in February of next year. The final system will look extremely like this. It's written in a slightly different technology. There'll be fractional differences. But I'm going to run through this mock-up, which is written in Java, to show you what it's like. Now, the first point I want to make about this demonstration is this is a user's view of a system. It is not a developer's view of a system. And I say that because probably one of the first things you've noticed is that there's a window called classes, which sounds rather like a developer concept. One of the things we've found is that users, ordinary users, are quite able to understand the concepts of object orientation. Classes, instances, methods, subclasses, instantiation, and so forth. And this is a simulation of, from the perspective of a benefits administration officer handling child benefit, which is one of the 40-odd kinds of benefit scheme that the department administers. And what you're going to notice in this demo is that everything I do is going to be done using principally one of these 6 classes of object which really defines their business. There are customers, who are the people who claim benefits or are involved in a benefit claim. There are communications, and these model emails, printed letters, faxes, phone calls, audio recordings for the blind, and even notes from face-to-face meetings. There is the child benefit scheme itself. Because this is the first one that's being rolled out, there's only one scheme. Ultimately, you would imagine that there would be perhaps 40 different schemes available, to an appropriately qualified officer. There is a case object which holds a lot of stuff together and allows it to be managed whilst it is being handled by an officer or waiting on input from a customer. In some respects, the case object encapsulates things that you might understand as workflow. But I want to make the point right at the beginning here that this system is the very antithesis of workflow. I read many years ago a comment by Esther Dyson who said that workflow systems treat the user as a server. That's a very profound comment, an architectural comment. What she meant was that in a workflow system, it is the system that runs the business process, and it only subcontracts to the user those things that it doesn't know how to do for itself. Oh, we need a name typed in here. Get the user to do that. We need a product to be selected here. Get the user to do that. Now, this is the opposite of that. In the demonstration, you'll see there is no script, there is no workflow, there is no process in explicit form. The user is in control, the user is solving problems, just like in the Incredible Machine. And you'll see the visual similarity perhaps already. The payment object handles checks, bank transfers, smart cards, bus passes, or any kind of payment in kind. And the officer object, officer is their term for an employee who has legal right to make decisions about claims. Now, these are the representation of the classes, and if I right-click as a user on one of these, I see what amount to class methods. And so the typical class methods are to create a new instance, to look at existing instances, to look at subclasses if there are any, and to find an instance. In the case of officers, I don't have many instances here, and so I'll open that window. And what you can now see here are icons representing individual instances. I'm logged on here as this officer, Roy Malin, and if I open that up by dragging it out, you can see that there is some primitive data, my name here, also some further secondary objects which are communication addresses like an email or a phone or whatever. There's also a collection. This little symbol here is, for those who understand OO, is a collection object. And so there's a collection of incoming messages, outgoing messages, my caseload, which is currently empty, and so forth. Now, much more important than the attributes and the other objects which one of these objects contains is the behaviors. If I right-click in any context on an icon, I get, as well as some generic viewing mechanisms here, I get business behaviors, log on, log off, communicate. Communicate is grayed out because I can't communicate with myself. But if I right-click on Mary Legaty here, I can say communicate. It brings up a communication object, which you can think of as an email. In this case, it is an email because that's both of our preferred form of communication. It's at the top of our list. And if I right-click on a communication, you can see I can duplicate it, forward it, transmit it, and those other things you would do to an email. So let's look at a scenario now. I'll keep the officer's window open here. A customer rings up. They're trying to move to more phone-based form of interaction away from paper forms. Her name is Mary Cahill, and she wants to claim child benefit. So the first thing I need to do is retrieve the Mary Cahill object. That's found me a match. I'm going to drag this one out and guess that that's right. Now, of course, I shouldn't guess. The first thing I should do is authenticate properly, and that would be a method on the customer object. It's only grayed out here because it's not implemented in this particular mock-up. But again, you can see here are the behaviors we would need to invoke or might want to invoke in the context of a customer. Now, again, looking at the details here, we have communication address objects for her. We have 3 known payment method objects, 2 bank accounts and 1 post office. A lot of payments in Ireland are done through books at the local post office. We also have a collection of relationships that we know about. If I open that up and view it as a table, we know that she is the parent of these 5 children and wife of Jack Cahill. Each of these is an object in its own right. Each could be opened up by dragging out. Each could invoke behaviors just by right-clicking. Okay, so she says, I've not claimed child benefits so far. I'd like to do that. I can shortcut that simply by dragging her onto the child benefits scheme. And that's done a number of things. First of all, it has created a new instance of the child benefits scheme, which we can think of as a worksheet for recording information, recording decisions, and so forth. It has also created, it's put the customer object in it as a reference, so in fact I could do anything I wanted to there. I don't have to go over here, but I'll keep that open just for convenience. It's created a new case. If we drag that out, you can see that the case object knows the customer, it knows the assigned officer, that's me, and any schemes involved. If at a certain point I decide, well, I need to refer this to someone who specializes in people seeking asylum seekers, let's say, then I just drag that case onto Anne here, and you can see that first of all it changed the assigned officer here, and it created a communication to Anne so that I could send some notes and ask her to do something and then send it back. The other thing it's done is it's dragged in the 5 children. If I open up that collection as a table, you can see that it's done some basic calculations on the eligibility. These 2 children are over 16. Looking at this as an officer, I can see that these 2 are twins, Philip and Elizabeth, and so I can rate those as multiple birth 2 in the official jargon, and that changes the rate. You might ask why the system didn't do that, and the answer is that under Irish law, whether you are a twin or not is an officer's decision. It turns out that you can't do it off the date of birth because a significant number are split over midnight on 2 separate dates, and they have one case where they're split 3 months apart. If one goes to prison, you're no longer legally a twin. And if you've ever played the exceptions game in object modeling, these people are masters at it. I can say, well, hypothetically, Mary, you would be getting £141 a month. And she says, okay, good, let's go ahead. Now, I can't, in fact, I'd like to communicate that decision to her in writing. That's grayed out, and the reason is I haven't actually made a decision at this point. This is a hypothetical award. What I need to do is sign off at some point. So I'll again right-click, do a sign-off. That's created here, a digital signature object, which I must now either award or decline. Having awarded it, those are now grayed out because I cannot change that. It's a legal decision. It would have to be overridden by a higher officer if necessary. And so I can put it into payment. Now again, I can't create the payments. That's grayed out. The reason is I haven't actually specified a payment method. We need to know how to pay her. You might ask, well, how do I know that that's the reason? On this demo, it's just because I know. But in the version they're now implementing, if you hold the cursor over that grayed out option, then you'll get a little balloon saying you need to supply a payment method. So let's just go back to Mary here and bring in her bank account, ask her which one she wants, and we can then put that into payment. The first payment will be created manually. There's the payment instance. That can be issued, reconciled. If it's a book form, it can be stopped, it can be reported stolen. There are all the behaviors and so forth. I'm not going to do any more of this demo because it gets rather specific, but I want to give you, that demo gives you a flavor of what I'm talking about of expressive systems. That is an expressive system. Now I want to draw out a couple of features of that for you and then tell you about the advantages of this approach. Everything I did there was done as an action either on an object instance or in some cases on the object class itself. You saw some class methods as well. All interactions followed what is called a noun-verb style of interaction. I selected on a noun and then fired a verb on that noun. Now almost all business systems today, core business systems like this would be, follow a verb-noun style of interaction. You select a verb from a menu, typically a list of KICS or ACMS transactions, and you then supply the nouns in order to fulfill that task. Now, there is a whole host of evidence that says that noun-verb interaction is more natural for users, easier to understand, and certainly more expressive. The incredible machine is noun-verb style of interaction. The Windows desktop is noun-verb style of interaction. Any drawing program or CAD system is noun-verb interaction. And yet our core business systems continue to be designed as verb-noun. And there are a bunch of reasons for that, which I'll come to later on. But it is one of the things that makes business systems so profoundly unsatisfying for people to use. Now, the other thing that I want to bring out about that demo is that it is almost completely modeless. You can do any legitimate action in any context. If in the middle of that process Mary had said, well, can I just check what address you have for me now? Or actually that bank account no longer applies. Or even, what do you mean 5 children? I've got 6 children. Why haven't you registered the 6th one? We could do any of those legitimate actions in any context. You would not have that annoying business of, well, we'll just finish this, sir or madam, and then we'll be able to get on to that. How many times do you encounter that? Now, why is the DSCFA, which is a government agency, a public sector organization, not known for leading in IT, made a bet on an unproven, risky, immature technology or set of concepts like expressive systems? Something attracted their attention and gave them a desire to do this. There are now, I've worked now with 5 organizations, no more, to prototype systems of this kind, and all of them who've tried it are very, very excited by the possibilities. I want to try to explain some of that. Just to give you one thing for the DSCFA. When I demonstrated this mock-up back to the Director General of the DSCFA, his first reaction was, you know, for the first time, this is a system that's compatible with what we've been saying to our staff for years. For years we've been saying, we want to empower you, we want to treat you as caseworkers, you're not just process followers, you're problem solvers. And yet our systems deny that. For the first time, this not only is a problem-solving environment, but it says to the users, you are a problem solver. It doesn't say you are a dumb process follower. I'll look into that as we go on. And my ambition for the DSCFA is that within a couple of years of this system going live, that the users of this system will cite this system as one of the reasons they show up for work. Not the most important reason, I'm not that ambitious, but it would make the top 10. Now let me break down more formally what's different about these expressive systems. I want to talk about product and process. The expressive systems concept, which I've given you an example, has 2 advantages. It results in a better kind of system, that's the product side of the subject. And it also has a profound effect on the systems development process, which I'll come on to second. Let me start by talking about product. If you design systems in this fashion, and people are always asking me to summarize this idea in a sentence, which is sort of hard to do, but I guess I would say it means designing systems using behaviorally complete objects that show directly through to the user and not allowing any other form of interaction. That's the sort of hard definition, if you will. Designing systems in this way results in systems that empower the users. It treats them as problem solvers and not as process followers, which is what the majority of our systems do today. Now that has very real and tangible business benefits, and I guess the easiest place to see this is at the customer interface. I want to stress that this is not a theory about customer-facing systems, it's just that those are the easiest examples to deal with. And let me give you an illustration of how this is important. Some months ago, I was in New York at the Pfizer office, and I wanted to get a car to pick me up and take me to the airport because I had a lot of luggage and it was raining outside. I didn't want to wait for a taxi, and so I rang up Boston Coach. Now, Boston Coach is a very fine organization. I've used them for some years, very good customer service. I'm sure many of you have used them also. And after I'd got through the mandatory press 1 for a new booking and 2 for blah, 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 I got to speak to a customer service representative, and this is how the conversation went. Good morning, sir. How may I help you? I'd like a car from Midtown Manhattan to JFK early this afternoon. Can you help? And she said, may I have your name, please? And I said, yes, it's Pawson. First name, Richard. Just a moment, sir. Oh, yes, you've booked with us before. Are you still with CSC? Yes, I am. In that case, I'll need a project number. Well, that's going to be difficult. I don't have a project number for this particular trip. I'll tell you what, I'll pay with a credit card and I'll reclaim it on expenses. That'll be simpler. No problem, sir. Which kind of credit card? I'll pay with American Express. What is the number on the card? It's 3791-078-496-21203. I did change a couple of digits there, by the way. Expiry date is 0104. Name as it appears on the card, Richard W. Pawson. Pickup time, 2:15 this afternoon. Location, it's the Pfizer office on East 42nd Street. I don't remember the number. We can look that up for you, sir, just a moment. It's 234 East 42nd Street. Going to JFK. Which airline? British Airways. Which flight number? Why do you need that? Well, just so we can alert you if the flight's delayed. Oh, that's great. I don't know the flight number, but it leaves at 6 o'clock going for London. We can look that up. It's the BA 217. Great. And finally, we just need a contact telephone number for you today. That's going to be difficult. I'll tell you what. You can leave a message at the hotel. I'm staying at the Grand Hyatt on 42nd Street and Park Avenue. We can look the number up just a moment, sir. It's 212-438-1234. Your room number, 1634. Thank you very much, sir. Just a moment, please. Sorry, sir, no cars available. Well, I could go half an hour later. I'm not that tight on time. Oh, just a moment. We'll try that. It turns out there are no cars available in Manhattan the whole afternoon. It's the New York Marathon next day or something like that. Now, my point is that as I originally expressed my requirement, which was, can I have a car from Midtown Manhattan to JFK early this afternoon, that was enough information that I should have got. I should have got one of 3 answers. I should have got, certainly, sir, no problem, we've got plenty of cars. Or, look, sorry, sir, I'll stop you right there, but we just don't have any cars this afternoon in Manhattan. Or maybe she might have answered, well, things are quite tight. We're going to have to go through the whole process and get all the details, and we may or may not be able to accommodate you. But in that case, she's now solving my problem. I'm not going to feel so bad at the end of it as I did. Now, this situation is remarkably common. This is not the fault of that customer service representative. It's essentially the fault of the system design, not just the technology, but the whole system, in which somebody has attempted to optimize the whole script and take all of the decision rights away from the user of the system. In fact, it was even slightly worse than that. Because, in fact, the conversation began, she said, may I have your name? And I said, Pawson. And she said, no, I mean first name. And I said, Richard. And then she said, now I need your surname. And so I said, Pawson. Because somebody had decided that that was the optimal way through the script. Now, I find when I tell that story that there are 2 different reactions from systems people. One is well, the most common reaction is that that was simply poor systems analysis. And that if they'd done their job properly, they would have put a check for availability at the beginning of the script. No, there are circumstances where that doesn't apply, where that would be unhelpful. What is the problem here is the idea that the whole thing is scripted. Now, incidentally, that story has an interesting coda. I was speaking at the Vanguard conference last September in San Jose. And at a Vanguard conference, if you've ever been, they have the brilliant idea that all 150 delegates should have a microphone and be encouraged to interrupt at all times. And then also that they should all be equipped with internet access from their laptops while they're sitting there, so that when they're not interrupting you, they can be doing their email. Believe me, it's like that. It's one of the toughest venues ever to present at. And I had an hour's presentation, and I got about 40 minutes in after several interruptions. And this guy in the front row then interrupted. His name's Charlie Brenner, I think it is. He's the CTO of Fidelity. And he said, Richard, I just want to go back to your opening story. I don't know if you're aware that Boston Coach is a subsidiary of Fidelity. Now, in truth, I did know that, but I've forgotten. And he said, I've just emailed the chief executive of Boston Coach with your story, and I thought you might be interested in his reply. And he said, his reply says, we will fix the problem if Mr. Pawson will stop telling the story. To which I replied, I will stop telling the story when you have fixed the problem, from which you might infer that it has not been fixed. However, it did result in an invitation for me to go and present to the chief executive, in fact the entire management team of Boston Coach. And I'm not going to do a demo, but if we could just bring the screen up. I just want to show you that I in fact knocked up a system for them. This took 2 days. Which is a point I'll come on to later. I won't do the demo, but you can basically see that I modeled their business in terms of agents, customers, communications, bookings, cities, locations, my locations like Pfizer and my home and so forth, times, flights, cars, those nice grey Volvos that they have, drivers, and so forth. And was able to talk to them about this approach. Now, interestingly, when I finished the demo and I asked the questions, the head of IT said, well, I like this because it's just cool. But he turned to the head of the call center, a very big call center, and he said, but I can't imagine you liking this. And she said, why not? And he said, well, because you're always asking us to shave the average call time down from 24 seconds to 21 seconds and 21 seconds to 19 seconds. And this is clearly not optimal stuff. And she said, you know, you're right, but what I've realized for the first time is that we're going after the wrong problem. That we're trying to shave down and optimize the script, and the customers don't want that. And in fact, it's worse than that. It's worse than that because what's happening, and you can apply this to many, many situations now, is that the simplest and most standardized problems are not coming through the call center. They're coming through the website. They're coming through Amadeus or the reservation system. Another example of that is when I came here through Heathrow, you have a lot of self-check-in machines at Heathrow Airport now. And if you have a European flight, you can go and just swipe your credit card or your frequent flyer card. It retrieves your booking, checks you in, prints out sticky labels for your luggage if you need it, and shows you where you're sitting and allows you to select another empty seat if it's available. Great, really simple to use, very nicely designed system, takes less than a minute. So the question is, who are all the people who are queuing up at the check-in desk? And the answer is every single one of them has a problem, has a non-standard problem. Well, it's a bit of an exaggeration, but it's going that way. They want an unusual seating arrangement, they've got excess baggage, they need to change their ticket, and so on and so forth. And yet, the systems at the check-in desk are even less expressive. The staff are very competent, they know what to do, but it's like that Dilbert cartoon that you must have seen where it turns out the lady at the check-in desk is typing away, and it's the simplest possible transaction, and Dilbert wonders what's going on, and when he eventually moves off, it turns out that she's writing a novel and incorporating all the passengers into it. Have you ever had that feeling that that's, I mean, what are they typing all the time? And so Expressive Systems at the customer interface is about designing systems that are non-modal and which speak the language of the customer. And that has tremendous advantages. Now, that's not the only application of Expressive Systems. It has a lot of applications in operations. Again, let me use an airline example. In an airline, they have very effective systems for running the schedule. But when the schedule gets disrupted because of a weather storm, or President Clinton wants to have a haircut in Los Angeles, you remember that one? At least we were told it was a haircut. You get disruption and the whole system breaks down. I've been in the operations room when this happens, and certainly British Airways in the UK, it ends up looking like one of those black and white films about World War II where people are moving blocks of wood around on a map. The systems do not cope with individual problem solving. But I'm talking about empowerment here, and I read a very interesting paper recently by Andrew Clements who said, when we talk about empowerment, there's really two different kinds of empowerment. The first is what he calls functional empowerment, and that means I empower you because it makes sense from a business perspective, and you know that and I know that if I empower you, you can serve your customers better, we can take better operational decisions, we can distribute the decision making, perhaps save money and so forth. That's functional empowerment. And that is what most people are talking about when they talk about empowerment. That's what most empowerment programs are. And Expressive Systems contributes substantially to that kind of empowerment by providing a problem-solving environment. But what Clements said was there is another kind of empowerment that's actually more important. He called it democratic empowerment. I don't particularly like that term because it seems rather political. But I would call it intrinsic empowerment. And intrinsic empowerment is, I need to empower you because it's good for you. Because it increases your sense of self-worth and responsibility and motivation. Not because it delivers an immediate tangible benefit to the business. There is an indirect benefit to the business which has to do with motivation and retention. But there's no immediate tangible benefit. What Clements said is it's very important that we have both kinds of empowerment in a business. That functional empowerment alone, which is what most people are doing, it won't cut it. Now it turns out that Expressive Systems also has an important role in intrinsic empowerment. And this intrinsic empowerment is this sense that I am in control. And I'll come on to that in a moment. But we are dealing everywhere with the consequences of intrinsic disempowerment. Everywhere you look. Now, I'll give you a couple of rather silly stories, but they'll make the point. In the UK, we have a large out-of-town DIY chain called Homebase. A friend of mine went into Homebase not very long ago, and the first thing, it's very hard to find a member of staff at Homebase at all. And he eventually found one. It was some acneed youth who looked like he didn't know which end of a screwdriver you would actually hold. And he said to this guy, do you have any mahogany-faced plywood? And this guy says, no, I don't think so. And Greg, my friend, said, well, would you please find out? You know, I want to buy some mahogany-faced plywood. And the guy reluctantly shuffles off and comes back some minutes later, having consulted, presumably, another acneed youth. And comes back and he says to Greg, no, I don't think so, because there's no such thing. And Greg said, well, I can assure you there is. I just want to know whether I can buy some. And the guy says, the assistant says, no, it's like this, because mahogany is like a kind of wood that comes from the mahogany tree. And plywood is like another kind of wood that comes from the ply tree. That is the product of decades of intrinsic disempowerment. I'll give you a reverse example. We have in the UK a very popular, very successful radio station called Classic FM, plays classical music. And I was listening to it one day, and I don't know a great deal about music. I'm not a musician, but I was listening to this music, and there was this stunning piece of piano music. I just loved it. And I waited at the end for the back announce. I was driving in a car, and just as fate would have it, just as they made the back announce, there was a truck behind that went, pop, like that. So I failed to hear the back announce. But I knew that Classic FM has a website, and on the website it has its playlists. So I got home, get onto Classic FM, and I remembered roughly where I was, and I was able to work out the time, that it must have been between 5 and 5:15. And I looked it up, and I didn't remember anything about the piece, but the next piece after it was something I recognized. It was Mozart's Clarinet Concerto, or something I recognized. So I looked for Mozart's Clarinet Concerto, and it's not there. And in fact, there's nothing in this playlist around that time, half an hour either side, that could have been this piece of piano music I was listening for. So I rang up. They have a fulfillment company. I think they sold it to Boxman or somebody anyway, but a CD company. And I rang them up and got the call center, and I said, I'm trying to trace this piece of music I heard on Classic FM, but it's not on the playlist. And this guy said, well, yes, I'm afraid the playlists are sometimes wrong. We can't do anything about that. I said, well, do you have a more accurate one? No, sir, I'm sorry, it's the same. We've got the same information that you have. Oh, well, that's a real shame. I really want to get this piece of music. Well, he said, well, can you tell me anything about it? Do you remember the name of the artist or anything about the name? I could do a search. And I said, well, no, I can't. He had a foreign name. It doesn't... Well, that doesn't really narrow it down a lot, sir. So he says, well, can you hum a few bars? Now, I'm an Englishman, and we do not feel very comfortable singing to strangers over the telephone. But besides which, I said to him, actually, I'm so desperate I would. I can't remember any of the melody. It wasn't that sort of piece. He said, well, can you tell me anything about it? And I said, well, it was very rhythmical. There was a lot of deep bass rhythm. And it wasn't jazz, but it was a modern piece of music. And I do think I heard the guys say that the composer was playing it himself. And it's strange this, I'm not a pianist, but there was so much going on in the music that it sounded to me like there were four hands playing, but it was only a solo. The guy says, I know exactly what this piece of music is. It's by Ludovico Einaudi. It's called Leonde. And so I'm so sure that this is right, I'm going to send it to you. And by the way, if you like it, I recommend that you also try this piece of music and this piece of music. Okay? Fantastic. It's absolutely right. Absolutely right. Now, my question is, how long do you think that guy is going to survive there? What does that do to the call length? That call took a minute and a half, for goodness sake. They're supposed to be doing it in less than 21 seconds. That's intrinsic empowerment. That's not functional empowerment. Okay. Now, intrinsic empowerment, why does Expressive Systems contribute to this? Brenda Laurel, in her very interesting research, talks about first-person versus second-person experiences. Mostly when you use a computer system, you have a second-person experience. You have the sense that you are asking the computer to do something for you, and the computer is talking back at you, and either saying yes or no. Now, it turns out that although we're very, very used to this, this is fundamentally disempowering. It is saying, you are not in charge, you're asking me, the computer. Now, one of the things that's so important about direct manipulation is that it is a first-person experience. It's the experience that you are enacting directly what you want to do. As I'll say later, when people use a system like this, they do not think that they are interacting with a computer. It's very strange but very real, that phenomenon. They talk about what they are doing. not what they're asking the computer to do. It's direct in action. In the demo of the DSCFA, there was not a single dialog box. Dialog boxes are really evil ideas. Dialog boxes are really evil ideas. I logged onto my bank the other day, and I did a transfer. And I typed in the amount I wanted to transfer. It required me to separate out the pounds from the pence, the two separate fields, which is pretty irritating. But I did that. And then I selected, from this account to this account from drop-down boxes. And then I hit the OK button. And what happens? Up pops a dialog box that says, "Are you sure?" Now, several things about this dialog box. First of all, because it was generated through the system rather than through the application, it had a different look and feel. So you immediately get this slight worry that something's gone wrong because it's a different piece of software talking to you now. The second thing was I was quite sure when I typed in the numbers, but now I'm not anymore. And the reason I'm not is that the dialog box is obscuring all the information. I can't even see. And so I think, well, maybe instead of £300, maybe I did type £30 million. And so it says yes or no. So I think, well, I better just go back and check that one more time. I hit no, and what does it do? Clears the fields. So I'm on a campaign against dialog boxes. You may have noticed in the demo that as I dragged with the cursor an object over various fields, they briefly flashed red or green. I don't know if you noticed that, to indicate whether I could or couldn't drop in that area. Now because that is instantaneous, it has an almost physical quality. That is not a computer talking at me now. It's just a sense of whether I can or can't. I'm hoping at Dublin next year to get some hapless undergraduate to do a research project for me on actually linking that up to a force feedback mouse or a force feedback joystick. So that instead of even flashing, you would actually feel the cursor being attracted towards certain fields or pushed away from certain fields. Now, that's actually a very serious idea. You learn what Brunner called an inactive representation. You learn what can and can't happen in the same way that you learnt how to post the square and the circle into a posting box as a child. That's the kind of thing we need to do. Okay, that's all about intrinsic empowerment. I want to just round off there. I read a couple of weeks ago Robert Canigal's excellent biography of Frederick Winslow Taylor. Frederick Taylor, who, as you probably know, more than any other individual influenced the way we think about industry today. He was a brilliant man, and I believe his message was right for the time, which was the turn of the 19th century, the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. But we have moved on. We have to undo now the legacy of Taylor. In this book, there's a chapter called The Faustian Bargain. It's a very well-titled chapter. I had not realized this about Taylor, that Taylor started off with his theory of scientific management. He started off optimizing machine cutting speeds and various other physical actions in a machine shop. And then he realized that wasn't going to get him as far as he wanted to go towards the one best way, as he called it, what was the optimal performance. So then he started looking at the human interaction, and he conducted all those famous experiments with what was how many tons of pig iron could a man move with a shovel in a day if you tried varying the size of the shovel, and so on and so forth. And he was a man, Taylor was a man who genuinely believed, and rightly so, that he was acting not just for management, that he was acting for the workers as well, that he was increasing their material benefit in terms of improved pay for them and improved profits for the managers. And he tried simply incentivizing people with differential piece rates. And he got some success, but he didn't get to where he wanted to go. And that was when he struck the Faustian bargain. He said, okay, if we are going to optimize this, you have to give up all decision rights. and I'm going to have to pay you to give that up. And he simply conducted scientific experiments the same way he'd done the shovels, the same way he'd done the machine tool speeds, and he tried paying them 5% more and 10% more and so on and so forth. And at 35% more pay, people were prepared to concede all decision rights to him. So I'll decide what you do, and you just do it. And we're living with that legacy, and it pervades our systems design. Now, in 100 years, our material standards of living have shot up dramatically, but it's time to now address the sense of self-worth and motivation in jobs. And I want to put out as my plea to you, this is a heartfelt belief, I am not against automation. If we can automate a job, if we can get a computer to do a job that a human was doing, I'm all for that. Okay, let's move people on to other things. But here's the kicker. If you are designing a system in which there is a human interaction still, there is a human still involved, I want to argue that your first consideration should be to make that experience, that job, as rewarding as possible for the user. That's my manifesto, if you like, in Expressive Systems. And that's nothing to do with usability engineering. Okay, that's just old-style thinking. It's about expressiveness and problem solving. I promised to also talk about the impact that this approach has on systems development and the systems development process. So if you found all that bit of the talk really rather too squishy and right-brained, then this bit is for you. This Expressive Systems approach of surfacing core business objects to the user, to the user interface, I believe for the first time makes it possible to realize the claimed benefits of object orientation in their full capacity. Why is that? Well, first of all, this approach forces you to create behaviorally complete objects. If there is no other way of invoking functionality, if there are no scripts, there are no processes, you have got to put your business functionality inside the instantiable business objects. And that was the original intent of object orientation that was lost almost immediately as soon as the software engineers and methodologists took over the idea. And this is getting back to that. Now, if you do that, what's the advantage? Because it's sure difficult to do it that way. We have to undo almost every assumption. Why is it, okay, that almost every system designed using object-oriented techniques ends up with a separation between process and data, which is what OO was meant to overcome? I'm sorry, but that is simply the case everywhere. We call them process objects and data objects, but it's still a separation of process and data. The system I showed you is one of the first or few examples where you do not see that separation occur. Now, what's the advantage of this? Well, first of all, you end up with an absolutely common language between the user and the developer. Now, other people have claimed this for OO for years, but what they mean is a common language between the systems analyst and the developer. I'm talking about an absolutely common language between the user and the developer. And what happens is, very quickly, users start saying to developers, you know, I need another subclass of that communication object that would do standardized communications. Or can I have a method on the payment object that would allow me to check whether it had been claimed or not? Or can I have another attribute in the customer object that would allow me to look up all the cases? Can I show the case objects inside it? You absolutely end up with a common language. And that dramatically improves the relationship between the users and the developers. There is no current mainstream methodology that does not preach heavy user involvement in the design process, right? But why is it, and I go around the world and I talk to a lot of people about this, why do people continually report the difficulty of getting user involvement? It's not because they're too busy, it's because the process isn't rewarding enough for them, it's not interesting enough. The project that I did at Safeway 2 months ago, they said afterwards, and they pride themselves on having a reasonably good relationship between IS and the rest of the business, they said they had never seen the users so keen to be involved in a process of designing the system as this had done. There's another really startling impact on this approach. In fact, can we just bring up the DSCFA example again? This system, this mock-up, functional mock-up, I developed myself. All I had to do was define the business objects in Java, but I had to define customer, its attributes, and those methods that showed through. Just as if I was defining a business object somewhere in the middle tiers of a business system. I did not have to write a single line of code to do with the user interface. That user interface is auto-generated from the business object definitions, 100%. Now, that has two effects. It, of course, significantly speeds up the development process, but it has another rather bizarre effect, which is that it causes the user interface to disappear. If you go to anyone who's been involved in this project at the DSCFA or at Safeway or Abbey National where I've worked, they do not talk about the system as having a user interface. Strangely, neither do the developers, because the developers haven't had to write one. Everybody talks strictly in terms of the business objects and their behaviors and their attributes. And that means that prototyping, which is now a very widely recognized concept, becomes vastly easier. In conventional prototyping, what you're prototyping is a user's view, very different from the underlying representation. Here, you're prototyping one and the same thing at the, you're prototyping both at the same time because they are the same thing. And that changes the whole process of eliciting requirements. When I started at Safeway a couple of months ago, working on a very tricky application that had actually failed to get going under their conventional methods, they said on the first day, they gave me a sheet of paper, a letter-sized piece of paper, and they said, well, here's the requirements analysis, so that will help you to get started. There's a list of 26 requirements. They're big fans of a methodology called DSDM here, and they had done what's called a Moscow analysis. Now, the term is unusual, but the same concept exists in many methodologies. They had asked the users to list their requirements, 26 of them, and as the top-level ones, and they'd asked them then to grade them as must-have, should-have, could-have, and won't-have. And you've all seen this kind of requirements prioritization. So I looked at this and I said, let me understand this correctly. You have asked the users to imagine a system that's never been built before, which is tremendously difficult to do for anybody. You've asked them to imagine and list all their requirements in the absence of anything to see. And then before you do anything else, you say to them, well, you obviously can't have all of this. I mean, is this good politics? I tore up the piece of paper. I never read it. We got the users in. We went straight to talking about what the objects were. Incidentally, the worst possible thing you can do to design an object-oriented system is to start with use cases, despite the fact that every OO methodology teaches that. We talked about what the objects were. We prototyped the system. We went through 4 or 5 iterations in 2 weeks. At the end of 2 weeks, I asked them to bring back a copy of that piece of paper. Point 1, every single one of those 26 requirements was already in the prototype by that point. Point 2, they now realized, when we now started to say, well, now we've prototyped and mocked up, we have to talk about release phases. They understood that. And if you want it released gradually, what do you want in the first release? The stuff they wanted in the first release was stuff that had come out of prototyping that wasn't even on the original list because they'd not been able to envisage it. And the third point was when they went back through the list, they said, now we look at it, half the things on that original list were so trivial they should never have been on the list anyway. Item 19 was we want password security, as if you're going to build a system today that doesn't have password security on it. And that has to be somehow prioritized against whether we want pictures of the product in the system. Okay? This changes the whole notion of requirements gathering. The requirements gathering happens through prototyping the system. Now, what I want to do at this point is ask for some questions. I have a microphone here. Perhaps we could have the room lights up and get you some questions. I'm more than happy to take objections. I realize there are many objections to this idea. The only thing I would warn you, I've had a lot of them before, for every single objection that you can come up with, I can name 2 objections that you didn't think of. Okay, so let's have some questions. I'm down here, so if I don't get it, I'm going to start picking on people, but here we go. Bev.
I'm sure you have objections to these objections, and I want to hear them. But we seem to spend a lot of time when we're building systems idiot-proofing them, to use a word that you probably use the same term in Europe. This clearly seems to be going the other direction. We're not putting any idiot-proofing in, and how do you deal with that?
Yeah, good question. First of all, in this approach, we design systems for the smart user first of all. Throughout the exercise at the DSCFA, they said, well, this is radical stuff for people, and there's going to be a certain amount of disorientation. How are we going to guide them in? My first point is that if you design a system to be expressive, it's absolutely straightforward to put scripting back onto it if you have to. It is extremely hard to go the other way around. If you design a system for the idiot, it's very hard to make a system that a smart person can gain some benefit from. This is not about idiot-proofing. It's not even about being intuitive. That's a misleading concept in systems. So that's my first point. But the second one is the reason we have to idiot-proof systems is because we treat people as idiots. We basically script everything for them, and so they fall into that pattern of saying, I've got to follow the script, and then when something doesn't work the way they want it to, there is no initiative left to try to work. Now, when we showed that mock-up to users in the remote northwest corner of Ireland who were going to be using it eventually and who had not been involved in the development process, I showed it to a dozen of the users. I have to say, the initial reaction, there was a certain amount of fear in there. But when we dug deeper, it turned out a lot of that was to do with the fact they'd never used a PC. At all. They were green screen, dumb terminal. And so, there was nervousness about, how will I learn this? But interestingly, within an hour, people were saying that they related to the object model immediately. They said, could I have 2 customer objects open at once? Yeah, let me show you that. If I were to drag the customer onto the payment object, what would that mean? Well, what would you think it would mean? Well, I would think it would mean, have we made a payment to that customer recently? We haven't thought about that. That's a good idea. Let's try that out. Now, my point is you don't get that kind of behavior, and these are not super smart users in the conventional sense of the word. You don't get that behavior from conventional systems. Okay? Other question?